Thank you for listening to the Distinguished Physical Education Podcast. Before we get into today's episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to something I'm really excited about. The dates and location for the Colorado Health and PE Council Summit are set for June 3rd and 4th at Hinckley High School in Aurora, Colorado. This is a free professional learning opportunity designed specifically for K through 12 health and physical education teachers. What makes this conference special is that every session is grounded in best practices in health and physical education and intentionally models effective instructional strategies. Sessions will focus on topics like standards-based activities, assessment, curricular resources, inclusion, student voice, and teacher growth. You'll find both classroom-based and activity-based sessions, but you won't be sitting silently through lectures or just playing games with no connection to teaching and learning. This conference is designed to give you ideas and strategies that actually make it back into your classroom and elevate the experience your students have every day. Another thing that sets this conference apart is how we support our presenters. If your session is accepted, you'll receive feedback, guidance, and an invitation to a virtual facilitator prep session so you feel confident and prepared to lead meaningful learning. If you're interested in presenting, submissions are open now with a deadline of March 15th, 2026. You'll find the submission form linked in the show notes. And if you're planning to attend, save the dates and spread the word. Registration will be open soon. We hope to see you there. Today, I'm speaking with David Tian. David is working on his Master's of Education in Health and Physical Education from Northwest Missouri State University and has been working in South Korea as a teacher since 2019. He has taught various subjects including English, computer science, and physical education. David brings an incredible level of creativity and cultural awareness to his physical education program, from incorporating pop culture and Korean games to exploring unconventional activities like juggling and martial arts. His approach opens doors for students who might not always connect with traditional sports. In today's episode, we discuss how he uses relevance, variety, and structure to engage students and build classroom community, while also sharing some real-life moments and lessons learned along the way. And now I bring you David Tian. David, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You bring such a thoughtful and creative lens to physical education, especially in the way that you incorporate pop culture and unconventional activities. So thank you for making the time to join me all the way from South Korea.
Thank you for having me.
One of the things that I admire about your approach is how you utilize pop culture as a meaningful way to connect with students. So I'm curious, what kind of student responses have you observed when you integrate pop culture into your lessons? And have you noticed any shifts in motivation or classroom dynamics?
Working in South Korea, I'm able to incorporate elements of Korean pop culture and traditional culture into my PE classes. This includes traditional Korean games and games that children play growing up, as well as pop culture phenomena such as the extremely popular Squid Game series. And so in terms of games that children have played growing up, there's a game called 공기놀이. I'm not sure how to translate that in English, maybe Korean Jacks. Oh, actually, it did appear on Squid Game this past season. It was the one where you throw some colorful plastic balls or plastic jacks up and try to catch them. I was able to use that in my PE class. So first of all, that exercises fine motor skills and finger dexterity. So I consider it a valid PE activity. But in addition to that, what I would do is have students compete against each other, and then losing students would have to draw a card from a deck of cards. And based on the number and the suit of that card, they would do a particular exercise. So for example, maybe King of Hearts would be, so King would be 13, Hearts is cardio. Get it? Hearts, cardio. So they do 13 reps, 13 reps of a cardio-based activity, or if they got like a 5 of diamonds, they would do 5 push-ups or something like that. And in terms of pop culture, I was able to include things from Squid Game. I remember when the second season of Squid Game came out and everyone was talking about it, I was able to include the relay race in my classes. And what I would do is have students, they would be tied up to each other using resistance bands, and there would be one PE-related activity at each station, whether it was a coordination-based activity, throwing a ball and catching it, or a strength-based activity, or like a basketball dribbling activity. And they would have to compete. Whoever did it quickest was the winning team. So these kinds of activities generally, what they helped me do a lot was increase student engagement, increase student buy-in. But at the same time, they also made things easier for me because students are already familiar with how to play these games. I didn't have to spend half the class explaining them. They grew up playing these games, and I just had them do what they were always capable of doing. So, in multiple ways, incorporating pop culture, incorporating traditional Korean culture into PE class has facilitated physical movement, enjoyment, and boosted morale.
So you noticed that when you incorporate these pop culture elements, students tend to be engaged more. Is that right?
I would say that to be engaged more, and it's more automatic in the sense that there's less pushback. No one has ever said to me, "Why are we doing this Squid Game? Why are we doing this Korean game?" I've never gotten that. Because they already know how to play it, it reduced the amount of time explaining, reduced dead weight time, more time spent in activity, more student buy-in.
You mentioned Squid Games a couple of times. Staying current with pop culture can be tricky. It's always been tricky for me, especially when you want it to feel authentic and age appropriate. What is your advice for getting started with incorporating various elements of pop culture in PE? And how should teachers keep it current without it feeling forced or inauthentic?
Excellent question. For me and for my particular use of Squid Game, fortunately was quite easy just because Squid Game is just so ubiquitous. It was very easy to incorporate. But even before becoming a PE teacher, when I was an English teacher and when I was teaching other topics, I was able to incorporate pop culture elements. So for example, K-pop, Korean pop music is very popular. Some of my students love BTS. So I was able to incorporate for English classes BTS related sentences depending on what we were studying. It's a English as a second language class, so they would be learning things like, I like BTS. I don't like blah, 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 blah. I could just put in, I like BTS. My favorite BTS song is, that helped increase student buy-in. And in terms of staying up to date with pop culture, I don't know all the Korean pop artists. I don't necessarily know all the TV shows, but just kind of listen to the conversations that students have. One student, for example, really liked the K-pop group Astro. I never heard of them before. So I went and looked them up and I was able to incorporate that very simply into the class. I prefer BTS to Astro. I prefer Astro to BTS. So that was for English class, but I'm sure there's a way to incorporate that into PE as well.
I have a friend, John. He just turned 83 years old. And one day, my brother and I had him over for dinner, and we were just watching random things on YouTube, and BTS came up. And our 83-year-old friend gave us the history of BTS, current members, previous members, his favorite songs. We were just blown away. It's hilarious.
He certainly beat me in terms of BTS knowledge then.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you also interview your students, and maybe it's informally, but you're asking students questions to see what connects with them so that you have pop culture elements that you could add into the class. Is that right?
I would say, sort of to an extent, interview might be a bit big of a word, but
Sure.
in just regular class time, hey, what did you do this weekend? Or what's your favorite food? Or what songs do you like? Did you watch Squid Game yourself?
I saw season one. What season are we up to? Three, you said?
3 is coming out at the end of this month. I'm just going to watch it and get more ideas for PE class. There's one game in the second season where people are listening to us like a children's song and going on around the circle. And when the song stops, you go to a room with a certain number of people. And I did the same thing in my class, a similar game inspired by that. Of course, don't worry, no students were harmed in the process. But when I called out numbers, there would be dumbbells scattered around the room. They would listen to a song, and then when the song stops playing, I would say a number, for example, 7. They would have to go around the room, get dumbbells that add up to 7 kilograms. So 2 kilogram dumbbell here, 3 kilogram there, and another 2 kilogram dumbbell here, and go to a corner. For safety purposes, I told them nothing greater than 10 kilograms. And then we would switch turns, like the winner of each round would get to be the teacher for the next round, and they would choose the song and they would choose when to stop the song. So doing so helped increase student buy-in because students love competition and they got an immediate reward, which is they become the leader. And then on top of that, I can listen to the songs that they're choosing and keep mental note of that. and use that in future classes or base future lessons off the songs that they like.
You are so incredibly creative and tuned into the interests of your students. You're able to connect with them based on current pop culture songs and other references that they enjoy, and then get them to engage in all of these fun activities that I'm assuming you created them, right? Like you're watching Squid Games and you're thinking, how can I turn that game into an age appropriate PE game for my students?
So thank you very much for saying that. And yeah, that's pretty much exactly how things work. Whether I'm scrolling on Instagram or watching TV shows or just hanging out with my friends, whatever we do, I think, how can I incorporate this into my PE class?
Your friends must love that. They always know what you're thinking about. David's trying to turn this into a PE game, I bet.
As long as it's a competition or a friendly competition or a game, yes.
You've found some really unique ways to blend Korean cultural elements with physical education, which makes the experience both culturally relevant and fun for your students, like we've been talking about. I'd love to hear more about what that looks like in your gym. So, you've already given us a couple of examples. Do you have any other specific games or activities that really have landed and connected with your kids?
Yes, so the school I work at right now, the gym is very small. So we are also limited in resources and limited in equipment. Fortunately, the pop culture elements themselves already halfway lend themselves to the setup of the gym. So for example, in the first season of Squid Game, there was the glass bridge game.
I remember that one.
Yes, so I was able to do that one. The school's gym has floor panels, so the ground itself is already separated into square tiles. So instead of having any new setup, I just used those square tiles and said, these are the glass panels. And then I'm going to write in advance on my whiteboard here, which glass is tempered glass and which glass is regular glass. And then as the students jump across, I tell them, you survived. And then the winner of each game became the teacher for the next round.
A lot of teachers are going to connect with your ability to utilize limited space and limited resources. That's something that teachers here in the US have to deal with on a consistent basis. So I love to hear how you've had success with a small gym and limited resources. Again, it shows how creative you are. It seems to me like you just always have a mindset of, I'm going to figure out what it looks like for my students to have fun and engage in this game, given the space and resources that I have.
That's the way I look at it. Every piece of equipment that you do have can be used multiple ways, creatively, safely. For instance, the school where I work, the gym doesn't actually have a basketball net. For the basketball unit, I have to have them practice shooting, but we don't have a net. So what I did was I printed out a picture of a basketball net from a bird's eye view, laminated it, and taped it onto the wall. So still not as good as an actual net, but at the very least, they still got practice trying to be accurate.
I'm interested in your mindset because I feel like there are teachers out there who would, maybe not many, but there are teachers who would say, I have a small gym. I only have a handful of, usable pieces of equipment. Geez, I don't even have basketball nets in here. So I'm just not going to teach my kids basketball. Did you have to move from that mindset to the one that you currently have, or have you always just been willing to be creative and implement new ideas?
I would say that I didn't have to make any sort of mental shifts. I kind of always enjoyed physical activity. And actually, growing up, I myself was not very athletic. And yet I became a PE teacher. Basketball is great, but if all you have is one basketball, there are ways to incorporate basketball skills into the class, whether it's a team-based game of everyone stands in a circle, pass to a random person, and then you have to jump while passing or something like that. All sorts of ways to practice basketball skills with the equipment you have. I will say, though, to be fair to the teachers who might not have the same resources I do, I did have the fortune of having small classes. And although not unlimited in my resources, I was able to order some equipment from time to time. And so I was able to use those things to my advantage, like the small class size and the ability to order some extra equipment as needed from time to time.
Were you building a program from the ground up? What was at your school before you got there?
At the school, we had a few soccer balls, a few deflated basketballs, and trying to think what else there were. Speed cup stacks, and some jump ropes. It wasn't completely, not much at all. considering the small size of the class. So I would say even without me ordering new equipment, I would have been able to manage to find a way to make things work.
You're the second person I've spoken to this week, actually, who is a current PE teacher, but doesn't have a background in PE. And what the teacher said to me just a couple of days ago was that she wondered if she should feel like a little guilty for not knowing all of the rules and skills to traditional sports. She said, I never played basketball when I was a kid. I don't know anything about baseball or soccer. And I think that might even give a teacher an advantage because you're not cornered in to just teaching these traditional units like basketball and soccer. And I think it opens up the door for you to be a little bit more creative.
Absolutely. In fact, what you just said, I mentioned I myself was very unathletic in high school. I was picked last for soccer. I was picked on in PE class. And if anything, I truly believe that that makes me an even better PE teacher. Why? Because PE is not about turning out the next Michael Jordan or the Korean soccer player Son Heung-min. PE is not about making students into those super athletes. It's about promoting active, healthy lifestyles at the student's level. Having been formerly uncoordinated and unathletic myself, I know what it's like to feel excluded, and I know what it feels like to be able to participate meaningfully. And so when I don't have these traditional units, for example, I taught myself how to juggle this past year just so I could teach it to my students. I consider that a valid PE activity. It's relatively low intensity, but it's legitimate movement, and you could easily scaffold it. So some of the more advanced students, they got to juggling 3 balls. Some of the less coordinated students, as long as they got to 2 balls, I was happy with that, as long as they all showed improvement. In terms of traditional sports like basketball, soccer, you don't have to be an expert at them to teach students certain skills. So first and foremost, the students themselves, most of them are not going to be that knowledgeable about soccer or basketball either. You are going to have those students who are very passionate about basketball or soccer, but PE is about catering to the majority, not to the super pro few. Having had some background in soccer made things easy for me, but having virtually no background in basketball, what I would do is I would go to YouTube, look up videos about basic drills or even creative game ideas and have students practice those and do it with my students. So if anything, I'm learning alongside my students too. And this way they still get the traditional skills development, traditional sports exposure, but they also have the more creative and fun elements of pop culture or competition.
One of the things that I like talking about with my guests is, and you just touched on it, which is not teaching the athletes, but just teaching your average PE student. There's some teachers who think that PE class is to get students ready for the high school basketball team or something. You and I both know, and a lot of our listeners know that that's not the case. So, one thing I like to talk about is differentiation. I'm thinking of juggling. Do you have any examples of how you make juggling easier for students? Are there ways that you modify that activity in order to make it more accessible? I imagine students getting a couple of objects that they could juggle and being a little frustrated with it at first. How do you help students find success when they're doing a brand new activity like that?
So in terms of scaffolding and differentiation, with juggling, for example, what I would do is everyone would start out with just 1 ball, easy, and toss it back and forth and back and forth. And then students who demonstrate proficiency with that, they move on to 2 balls, toss them back and forth, back and forth. And the students who are struggling, they still stuck with 1 ball. And then students who have mastered juggling 2 balls, I'll use other techniques with those 2 balls. So at each stage, each student is allowed to practice something meaningful to them while still having the more coordinated students advance to the next level. In soccer as well, I do this one drill in which they just kick the ball between their feet back and forth. And I tell them, if this is hard for you, do it slowly. You can just have both feet on the ground at the same time and lift one up. Or the more advanced students, you can jump up while doing it or like do it quicker. Both are valid. And the students who are more advanced, of course, they find the slower movement more boring. So they'll do the more advanced one on their own. The students who aren't that coordinated, they'll stick to the slow movement one. And I consider that to be a valid and worthy effort as well.
So you spend a lot of time thinking about how you can scaffold your activities and how you can put students through various skill progressions. You're describing something that I've phrased in the past as providing students with opportunities to feel comfortable in an activity, but also challenge themselves as well. You don't want them to be bored with the task and then they disengage. And when students disengage, usually off task or disruptive behavior is a result of that. Thinking about the other end of that, you don't want students to be so challenged by an activity that they don't experience any success. And then the result is the same, that they also don't want to engage in the activity and they start engaging in off-task behavior. So you really focus on meeting students where they're at and scaffolding activities so that they can all experience success. Another way that I've seen teachers do that, I'm thinking of juggling specifically here, is to use different objects to juggle with, like scarves or anything else that might stay in the air a little bit longer. Have you ever had students experiment or have any success with different types of equipment?
Yes. So for juggling specifically, I didn't use scarves, but I did have things like squishy fruit plushies, and those are much more difficult because they're irregularly shaped and they all have different weights. And so the students who found the regular juggling balls easy, they were given a chance to progress to the squishy fruits. And in terms of other forms of differentiation, I would do basketball drills as well, which we just start with regular dribbling with one hand, dribbling with another hand, crossover, and then pass between the legs. Some students, no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't pass between their legs. And that was fine. When we did drills, what I would have them do is dribble up and down the court, just walking, not a race, nothing like that. And then do crossovers up and down the court, and then pass between the legs up and down the court. For the students who could not pass between the legs up and down the court, I just said, it's fine, just do the crossover. That's totally fine. And what that did was it allowed those students to participate meaningfully because crossover is still a legitimately useful skill and advanced skill to develop, especially for these less coordinated students, allowed them to meaningfully participate without frustrating them or becoming too easy. And I also specified at the beginning of the year that I do reserve the right to modify activities so that all students can participate meaningfully. And so that was one way I got students who are more athletic to do, for example, pass between the legs, while still accepting the fact that their peers who are less advanced than they are could just do a crossover up and down the field.
You're speaking my language, David. I love it. You've got modifications for students who need them, and then also extensions off of that. So students who need that extra challenge, you've already got that prepared in your lessons as well. I love hearing about that. We talked for a moment earlier about traditional sports, and I think it's a challenge that a lot of PE teachers face, which is that they feel stuck teaching the same traditional units year after year. Maybe they have like a fear of trying something new and that it might not land well with students, whether it's juggling or, pop culture references, various activities that they've created on their own. Or maybe they think that it just might take too much time to prepare these new ideas. But you've shown that even small changes can create big shifts in student engagement and the amount of enjoyment that they have in PE class. What would you say to a teacher who is curious about branching out, but doesn't really know exactly where to start? They feel overwhelmed by the idea of it.
I would say start small. Still do the traditional sports like basketball, soccer, badminton units, but incorporate a little bit of something extra each time. For instance, in soccer, I didn't have students playing games right away. We had to build up to it. So starting with ball control skills, dribbling through cones, passing. Then we would play, for example, a game of World Cup in which students had to be on teams and choose a country. Every time they kicked the ball into the goal, they had to say the name of their country. And so this is a new activity. It's fun enough, but still fresh enough to increase student engagement. Then after doing that, we can also do is incorporate exercises that you've been learning. So for instance, if we do push-ups or other calisthenics, or I do finger dexterity exercises with my students, like moving your fingers in ways that are kind of complex and cognitively challenging. So when the students lost a game of World Cup, again, they would draw from a deck of cards, and that would determine the exercises that they do. Sometimes they're challenging exercises. Push-ups can be difficult. And I do let them do modified push-ups with their knees if a regular push-up is too challenging. But we also do some more unconventional ones like finger dexterity exercises. So all these ways to take a traditional activity, soccer, for instance, and push a little bit to incorporate fresh ideas each time.
It sounds to me like the advice that you would give teachers would be stay with the units that anchor your program. You don't have to change everything right away or even eventually, right? You can still keep those traditional units, but you could do a couple of different things. You could incorporate some of these more creative elements, maybe even make connections to pop culture, things that are relevant to their students into their traditional units. Or they might want to squeeze a brand new unit in between two other traditional units. Do you think that that would be a good piece of advice too for teachers in this situation?
Yes, all of the above, all that you've mentioned are excellent ideas. There's nothing wrong with staying with the traditional route because that serves its purpose. But if you want to branch out, you can always add on a little bit more each time. You could also squeeze in a new unit in between the traditional units you have. All of them work.
That's what I was just thinking, like a mini unit. So for a teacher who's in between two traditional units, maybe they just take 2 or 3 days to try a juggling unit with students. Teachers here in the US, the units that they teach are all different lengths. But let's just imagine that a unit is 5 classes long. Maybe they do 2 days of an activity like juggling or squid games or other cultural creative games or activities in between those two more traditional units, just a short unit, right? 2 days or something like that. I think that would be a great way to kind of experiment with the things that you're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Great way to experiment, see what works. And if it doesn't work, well, it was only 1 or 2 classes anyways.
So, as we start to wrap up, I always like to leave listeners with something tangible, something that they can try right away. You've shared lots of great ideas, lots of activities. I'd like you to maybe zero in on one that really stands out. What's one activity or strategy that you've used this year that you'd recommend to PE teachers to try out for themselves, something that they could adapt and use almost immediately?
Earlier in the year, when I was playing games with the students, instead of just having students blindly do calisthenics, they would be randomly selected after a team lost. At first, the numbers were chosen randomly from a deck of cards, but I would choose the exercises. The problem with that is when I choose the exercises, I can try my hardest to be fair. I can try to distribute the exercises evenly among different kinds of exercises, whether it's strength, flexibility, coordination, etc. But students still will perceive bias. And at this age, I'm working in a middle school and high school. Students, they can't always see the bigger picture. I'm sure that our listeners would agree. In PE class, physical strength, coordination, cardio, mobility, they're all equally important. But it is true that doing 12 push-ups might feel more challenging than holding a stretch for 12 seconds. What happened was one time, one student had to do a challenging calisthenics exercise for 12 reps that most of the class had to do. The next exercise after this student won the game, so he was exempt, but the rest of the class had to do the exercise, was a comparatively simpler flexibility exercise in which they held a stretch pose for a few seconds. I didn't know it, but the student became furious. And at the end of the class, this was one of the earlier days of the term in which I was still getting acquainted with the students, and I introduced them to the PE rules, maybe the third week of class. What this student did was when I gave it to him, the student didn't even look at me, ripped the paper out of my hands, crumpled it up, and slammed it into the garbage can very aggressively in front of me and the other students. And for me, considering how much heart I put into the PE class, I was very taken aback. And yes, I took it personally. And I didn't handle it the way I would have liked to because it was just so unexpected. And this was a student I had gone out of my way to help in many other cases. It just felt like we had good rapport. So it did feel like a huge slap in the face. And I do understand that at this age, they're not thinking in the bigger picture. He thinks, hey, I had to do one difficult exercise in the PE class, so it must be unfair for me, even though the majority of the class did it alongside him. When that happened, it undermined my authority as a PE teacher and dampened the mood and definitely impacted my morale as well. The strategy I implemented going forth was the number of reps was still randomly selected, but so were the exercises. I mentioned my deck of cards with the 4 suits. Instead of me rotating through those kinds of exercises like flexibility, strength, etc., verbally, I wrote down in advance, the heart is cardio, and this is the cardio exercise you'll be doing. Clubs is strength, and this is the strength exercise that you'll be doing. And yes, Strength might be difficult, like push-ups or squats, but this is randomly selected. It is impossible to perceive bias from the teacher. And so the one takeaway I would say is this. When you're doing these creative games and students are getting competitive with each other, if a student loses or has to do something challenging and sees someone else doesn't, even if they're told the rules in advance, they might lash out. To prevent that from happening, do your best to randomize things so that there's little input from the teacher. That way, the students will see, hey, the teacher didn't make me do this. The system chose it for me. And that would be my one strategy takeaway to ensure that everyone is on the same page, to make sure that no one perceives bias.
You're describing strategies that can make for an equitable environment in physical education. And you also brought in some examples of student voice as well. Anything that you can do to not make students think that they're being singled out for whatever reason. The other thing you made me think of is I think this is a great test for you because you're so creative. And you got me thinking about competitive activities and the impact that shifting some of those competitive activities over to cooperative activities might have. Do you have any examples that you can think of games that traditionally are competitive that you have de-emphasized the competitive aspect of them and made them more cooperative activities?
I did manage to do something similar. This was one of the earlier days in which we didn't actually do intense physical activity. In PE class, social emotional skills are equally important. Again, this is a pop culture reference. Do you remember the marbles game from the first season of Squid Game?
Of course.
So what I did was I had them play that game, and instead of doing push-ups or an exercise when they lost, the winner had to shake the loser's hand and say, "Good game." And the point of this was to develop that social emotional competence to emphasize that, hey, yes, you did compete against each other, but ultimately, whether you win or lose, you did your best and you're in this together. So that was the day where I de-emphasized physical activity and placed stronger emphasis on cooperation and getting along.
I think that the majority of PE lessons should be focused on standards-based social skills. We could talk about standards maybe another time. I don't know what you use in South Korea or if you just get to use whatever you want. Here in the States, which you might be familiar with, we have national standards, and then every state has their own standards as well. Most times they're pretty similar to the national standards. We have one here in Colorado, a grade level expectation. I think it's in third grade, maybe. And it's one of my favorites. It's students will be able to win and lose in socially appropriate ways. And the activity that you modified to make sure that students were congratulating each other at the end of the game, whether they won or lost, that really made me think of that particular standard and how you're not really worried about how students are physically performing in that particular game. I'm sure that if it's a soccer game and students make a physical error, you're going to give them some feedback on it. But that's not the thing that you're focused on in that game. The thing that you're focused on is if you win, act appropriately. And if you lose, make sure you act appropriately. And I just absolutely love that social and emotional focus as an objective for PE lessons.
Like I mentioned, that day was entirely focused on this social emotional development. Don't get me wrong, this is still PE class, we still get physical movement, but that forms the foundation of PE class. And so when we do have competitive games, that is the skill and behavior I want to see in the students. And so I did believe it was important to de-emphasize physical activity for one day for the successful operation of the class in the long run.
I like how you connected it to not only your own content area in the long run. I've also had conversations with teachers about how explicitly teaching social skills impacts students elsewhere. It impacts them in their classroom, it impacts them in the cafeteria, it impacts them at recess. And some of the most powerful stories that I have from all the teachers that I'm lucky enough to support here in Denver, Colorado, are ones where they taught social skills and other teachers came up to them and told them about what the students were saying at recess. A teacher would see two kids playing football at recess, and after one kid scored a touchdown, both kids would give a fist bump, offense and defense. They would fist bump each other and then just continue with the game. And they learned that in PE class because the teacher was explicitly teaching them how to congratulate their opponents when they're successful. So I just love when we're able to take concepts that we're teaching in PE and bring them into other real world situations, into other contexts.
That sounds amazing. I haven't had the honor and pleasure of hearing that yet, but hopefully I will at some point.
I hope so too. David, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today. Your students are really lucky to have you, and I learned so much, and I know that our listeners have as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Take care.